Perhaps surprisingly, I agree with much of what this John has said, and also this John, but I'm focusing on this John.
Listeners are lost. It's got to be on video.
I'm focusing on John Finnis for those of you who are watching the video. That is, I take it to be a consequence of the multiplicity of the connections, the putatively necessary connections between law and morality that legal positivists are impugning, that there will be many of those connections, which so people normally classified as natural law theorists will also take exception to, because I think that most of the present day, the contemporary theorists normally classified as natural law theorists will certainly accept what John Finnis has said about the status of an unjust law as a law. It is straightforwardly a law in one important respect. And then if we want to say that it's not a real law in the way that an incompetent doctor is not a real doctor, then that's a doctrine they can consistently accept along with their insistence that it nonetheless is a law in another important sense. So I don't have any objections to that. Nonetheless, there are theorists, that is, these people aren't just figments of legal positivist imagination. There are some theorists who maintain that the status of a law as a law in any straightforward sense or any other sense is dependent on its satisfying some modest test of moral acceptability or moral legitimacy. There are some people who take that view. Phil Soper, Derek Bielefeld, Roger Brownsword, Michael Moore in some of his writings. And to the extent that legal positivists are taking exception to a claim of that sort, they are doing battle with people of that sort and not with John Finnis or Aquinas. So it may well be that some of the ways in which legal positivists have contested claims, that is, when Hart takes exception to the assertion by Augustine that John mentioned, it may be that those specific contestations are misdirected, but I have no doubt that there have been assertions of necessary connections between law and morality to which legal positivists have rightly taken exception. Now, I fully agree that there will probably not be a legal positivist theory that can be disentangled from natural law theory. That is, there will be these battles are cross-cutting. So in some battles, I'm in alignment with certain natural law theorists, and then on other battles, I would be opposed to those same theorists. And I don't think that there is any tidy division in that sense. So I'm not at all troubled by the notion that there may not be a distinctive legal positivist theory that can be placed clearly in juxtaposition with and in opposition to natural law thinking. I'm happy if the two overlap in certain ways as well as are antithetical in certain ways. To me, that demonstrates probably the richness of each of those theories, and given the multiplicity of the foci of the disagreements, I would expect them to be complicatedly cross-cutting. So I'm not bothered by that. A brief word on John Gardner. I suppose in a major respect, I agree with John. That is, John Gardner. That is, I think that the sort of systematic exposition for which some theorists have striven, I think that's chimerical. But I think that seeking to come up with certain basic properties of law that are essential, and this I take to be what John meant by ascribing a nature to law. I think that's a perfectly worthy enterprise, and I'm happy to describe that as a theory of law. So I myself would accept Fuller's principles of legality, shorn of Fuller's anti-positivist diatribes, but I would accept his principles of legality, for example, as approximately, I don't want to say that they're an exhaustive account, but approximately a theory of the rule of law. And I would take those principles, properly understood, to be expressive of necessary features of law, or of the rule of law. And so that's one respect in which I think we can talk about the theory of law. But I agree that the sort of systematic exposition for which some theorists have hoped, I do agree that that's an illusion.
Well, there's something a bit suspicious about the fact that all the people you mentioned as having a more extreme, assailable, worthy theory, non-positivist theory, are people who are writing out in reaction, perhaps, to positivism. I mean, who were the bad guys whom positivists, in the first instance, thought they ought to assail? I mean, you rightly, I think, presented legal positivism as essentially like a defensive or offensive, I'm not quite sure which, a reactive theory, reacting against extravagant theses put forward in some body of theory that preceded it. But then I want to know who were these people, and I think the story is in fact a little bit different, that Bentham comes in and conceives of what really is the tradition of legal positivism. Partly, yes, in reaction against a tradition in which judges were looking into their breasts and coming up with answers out of thoughts that might be moral or might be political, but Bentham on the whole thought they were in fact really rationalizations of self-interest or class interest. There don't seem to be very many theorists that Bentham has any specific objection to. Just the whole body of tradition is entirely mistaken insofar as it's not completely materialist and empiricist in the most radical sense of empiricism. So Bentham conceives himself as getting back to palpable realities, and if it's not a palpable reality, then it's a fiction. And virtually everything that we, in fact, in this room believe in and talk about is for Bentham a fiction. And nothing but what you can touch and see or somehow interiorly sense is any kind of reality. So you get the definition of law as a command, and not just as a command in the sense that we think of a command, as a proposition that's asserted imperatively, but as the signs declarative of a volition. And why does he say signs? Because only the signs are powerful. You can hear them or you can see them. It's utterly reductive. And so everything that we would, I think almost all of us, believe about propositions and their connection and truth and coherence, logical validity and so on, is really rejected by Bentham. Now, as then happens, the disciples tend to fall away from the charismatic radicalism of the founder, and so you get the whole thing simmering down and coming back closer and closer all the time to the tradition until you find modern positivists really hard-pressed to say where they differ. So then one asks oneself the question, why do they want to go on casting themselves as